my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt-Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place for women to come together to share their childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from women all over the world. Today's episode is sponsored by Expectful, the #1 guided meditation and sleep app for your fertility, pregnancy, and motherhood journey. Just like you probably take a prenatal vitamin for your body, Expectful's meditations are like a prenatal vitamin for your mind and can help you have a happier, healthier journey to parenthood. Whether you are trying to conceive, pregnant, or postpartum, everything in the Expectful app was made just for this special moment in your life and created based on interviews with hopeful, expecting, and new parents just like you. Ready to reduce stress, improve sleep, and connect with your little one? Go to expectful.com/birthhour or download Expectful in the App Store to get started with a free trial today. Expectful.com/birthhour will get you an extended free trial of 14 days rather than 7 days. At the end of this episode, I'll be talking with Anissa all about their birth prep library that comes with your Expectful trial and with your membership, as well as their hypnobirthing course, which I've heard so many great things about, and I'm so excited that they have this offer because I know people are always looking for an affordable way to learn hypnobirthing. So stay tuned to the end of this episode to hear that conversation. If you'd like to join our Know Your Options childbirth course, you can do that at thebirthhour.com/course, and you can use the coupon code 100 for $100 off your enrollment. This is our comprehensive online childbirth course that you get instant access to as well as lifetime access to. So no matter what stage you're in, we would love to have you over there. And if you head over to thebirthhour.com/course, you can see in detail everything that's covered there, and you can always reach out with any questions as well. If you'd like to become a listener supporter, you can do that at patreon.com/birthhour. You can do this for as little as $1 a month and gain access to all of our archived episodes. And then you can move up through the different tiers to gain other perks like membership in our private Facebook group, monthly Zoom calls and bonus content, and even a second podcast called The Partner Podcast, where my husband interviews partners all about their perspective on pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Get all of that information over at patreon.com/birthhour. Today's guest is Charlotte, and she's going to be talking about moving really all over the world during pregnancy and planning for her birth and why she chose a home birth even during the uncertain times of COVID and while living in temporary accommodations. All right, let's hear from Charlotte. Hi, Charlotte. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I've been listening to your podcasts for 3+ years. So it's a huge privilege.
Oh, thank you. Can you start by telling listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Yeah. So my name is Charlotte. I'm originally from Denmark. I have a daughter who's almost 3 and a son who's 5 months old. I'm married to a very nice man from New Zealand. And we met in London, and we spent the better part of the last 10 years there. And we just recently moved to Singapore in September. So that's a little bit about me. And I actually studied and lived in the U.S. for 5 years, which is why I have a very strong American accent.
Well, you guys have had a big year. So I know we're going to focus mostly on your most recent birth story. So let's start with that pregnancy and how that went for you.
Yeah. So I found out I was pregnant in December of 2019. And I guess there were a couple of things about that. So one is that I've had 2 miscarriages beforehand. So one before my daughter's birth, almost 13 weeks. And that was very upsetting, I guess is the right way of framing it. I had another one just before I got pregnant with James, my son, which was extremely early on, like at 4 weeks, and was really just a heavy period, and was not upsetting at all. And I think I'd done a lot of work after my daughter's birth of just really, managing my own feelings around potential loss to be able to be really present in a pregnancy and really be with the pregnancy. And so when I found out I was pregnant with James, firstly, I didn't think I was very far along. I was still breastfeeding and having really inconsistent periods. And I just had this sort of woke up one day and felt like maybe I'm pregnant. And I thought I was probably like 3 weeks pregnant. And I took a pregnancy test, and I took one of those tests that said like the weeks, and it said 6+ weeks. And I was like, that's interesting. That's a little bit more pregnant than I thought I could be at this point. But anyway, so yeah, I found out I was pregnant, and just kind of, at the same time, me and my husband were talking about moving to Singapore from London with his job, but it just still seemed like that was, I don't know, potentially not happening, or at least something that would happen quite far into the future if it was happening. But yeah, I just sort of continued with the pregnancy. I felt really calm about it. I didn't have, with my daughter's pregnancy, I had quite a lot of anxiety around potential loss, or like that something might go wrong. But I didn't feel that at all with James. I just felt, really happy. I started getting sick almost immediately, which I didn't have hardly any morning sickness with my daughter. So that was a big surprise. And I also came into the pregnancy knowing that I wanted a home birth, and I hadn't had a home birth with my daughter. And I as I say, my great grandma was actually a traditional midwife in Denmark, and my grandma had my mom's mom had most of her children at home, so it wasn't something that was like completely foreign to me having home births. But I definitely feel like all my aunts had birth in hospital, all my cousins had birth in hospital, all my friends had births in hospital. Like it wasn't something at all that was common in my circles. And I had done a lot of sort of educating myself between my daughter's birth and my son's birth as well, around some of the things that happened in my daughter's birth and why they might have happened, just to find out sort of, I think for me, about how when you have a really low risk birth, that unnecessary interventions can sometimes happen in the hospitals, and sometimes births can take longer in hospitals, stuff like that. And I felt like for me, in the end, even though there was a lot of things that happened in my daughter's birth, I felt like all of it could have been avoided more or less, and that it was a really low risk, uncomplicated birth that was overmanaged in a hospital perspective. And I didn't have an epidural with my daughter, so I also had a little bit of Pitocin for like the last 2 hours. So I really was, knew how intense contractions could be, I suppose, and felt like they were very manageable and not something I would need medication for at any level. So I felt like for us going into this birth, that a home birth would be best. And another reason was that in the UK, you're managed by, I don't know how much you know about this, but you're managed by a team of midwives, typically, especially in the larger hospitals, which we were connected to. So you never see one care provider. And I found that really unsettling also with my first pregnancy and birth. And I really wanted consistency of care. And that's something that you can get if you opt for a home birth in the UK. So that was sort of like right away, I kind of got on that and was like, I would like to request to be seen by the home birth team, and tried to get myself into that trajectory. Obviously knowing that there are many good reasons also not to have a home birth, and that all kinds of things could happen over the pregnancy. And that would mean that in the end, we wouldn't choose to have the baby at home. So yeah, we got set up for that. I also have a little bit of gestational thrombocytopenia, which is when you have low blood platelets, but mine, I never have had any symptoms for it. So it's just something that you can see on the numbers. And I've seen a hematologist about it, I suppose, who was never any concern about whether that would change my risk status in terms of being still considered low risk, as long as I didn't have any symptoms. And I knew from having 2 miscarriages and a successful birth that bleeding has really not been an issue. So I felt very confident also going into this birth that wouldn't affect the home birth. But because of that, I did choose to see a nutritionist really early on as well, to just really try and make sure that my body and blood stayed like as healthy as it could be throughout the pregnancy. And I ended up getting, I think, some really empowering information, but also getting actually doctor sign off on eating, for example, liver, which I know is like a big no-no, like 70 grams every 2 weeks or something like that, just to really make sure that my blood state as absolutely healthy as it could be. And it was just like from day one, just a kind of a game changer. Like I just felt, except for the nausea, I just felt so good. I had loads of energy. I didn't have like any side effects of the pregnancy really. And certainly none of the ones I'd had from my daughter. I slept well. I had, I guess, are they called Charlie horses in English?
With
my
the
daughter.
leg cramps.
Yeah, I had those with my daughter, which I managed with like magnesium spray, but I never had that with my son. I had a little bit of anemia with my daughter. I never got that, even close to that with my son. And my blood platelet levels, they were only checked twice, but they stayed really good. So I was super happy. I had sort of made that commitment to bring that in early on because it just really supported the pregnancy. But in any case, yeah, so I was basically like, except for the morning sickness was past at the end of the first trimester, we went up and got a 12-week scan, which was, I guess, our second appointment after the sort of initial appointment of enrolling with the home birth team and stuff like that. And the 12-week scan went well. And that was in the end of January. And we were following, and now at basically the same week, we got confirmation that we would be moving to Singapore this year. And because we knew about the pregnancy, we decided right away to ask if we could move earlier in the year. We were originally planning to move then in April and having the baby in August because we felt like that would enable us to get set up here before the baby came. Because of that, we were also following the coronavirus situation really closely because at the time it was obviously happening in Asia, but not so much in Europe. And it still seemed a little far-fetched that it would seriously impact our lives. But I'm very much sort of a worst case scenario planner. So I also was like, we need to, just really plan for everything and really follow the situation really closely. So we did. And already towards the end of February, I kind of started saying to my husband, we might need to start looking at moving the date up because I feel like there could be more border closures and this might affect how we might be able to move around. And I also started looking into home births in Singapore. And I found out that that's really not something that's done in Singapore. But there is, I think, one practice that works with 2 midwives, which support home birth. And I was put in touch with them. And they were both lovely. And they said one of them had some space and time around the time of my due date and said she was happy to take me on once I got here, but also was a bit hesitant, I guess, to do too much work with me before I got to Singapore. So the plan then was to stay in the London home birth track and have a midwife there until about, I guess, 28 weeks when we were planning to move to Singapore, and then enroll with the midwives here and the OB practice that they're affiliated with upon arrival. And I felt pretty good about that. But I also I had a doula with my first pregnancy, and I through online found another doula who was kind of more focused on both being a sort of prenatal doula and doing a lot of kind of birth prep work, certainly with a lot of kind of hypnobirthing, meditation practice, visualizing your birth, meeting your fears, stuff like that, kind of doing some of the birth work before the birth. And I felt like knowing that I was moving and stuff, it would be really nice to create that space for myself, like once a month or whatever. So I engaged her, and that was really amazing because of also what then ended up happening. But then, basically I got to 19 or 18 weeks of pregnancy, and all of a sudden all the borders started really closing. And we basically were called up by the visa people in Singapore and told that if we didn't move right away, we might not be able to move. And so we decided to move right away. And we booked a ticket for, this was on the Monday, and we booked a ticket for the following Sunday. So it was like the 16th of March, and we booked the ticket for the 22nd of March. It was like a very rushed week, basically, to try and get things finished, like just even pack in London. We couldn't at that point see any of our friends because there were already a lot of COVID restrictions. And we were then rung up on the Wednesday. So just 2 days later, and we're told the border was now closed to Singapore from the UK. So we couldn't enter from the UK. But we were advised to go to New Zealand, where my husband is from, and then quarantine there for 2 weeks. At the time in New Zealand, we could enter because of my husband's nationality, and we would have to quarantine there, but in private facilities. And then at the time, we would still be able to enter Singapore from there. And we kind of talked that over, and we were like, this is like a crazy thing to do because we would basically need to leave tomorrow. And we weren't really planning on leaving for another month and a half. And, I'm pregnant. We have a toddler. Could we even find accommodation in New Zealand? But in the end, we decided to just do it because we didn't want to be locked down in London in our small flat in what felt like was very quickly becoming the epicenter, or one of the epicenters of the pandemic. And we felt like, okay, well, our best chance of getting to Singapore before the baby and getting kind of established in a new life is through New Zealand. Then we should go. And at that point, we had already wrapped our heads around leaving just a few days later. So it felt okay. So we decided to leave. We decided that I should wear something like very body tight so that it would be very obvious that I was pregnant, just so that I could like maximize the opportunity of potentially sitting down in the airport. And we were wearing like masks and gloves, and tried to get our 2-year-old daughter to wear a mask. She was just turning 2 that day. Actually, we left on her birthday. And it was just the airports at that time were really, really, really crazy and really, really intense place to be. The visa rules were changing all the time. People were getting stranded. We had originally planned to travel over Australia. And when I say planned, I mean just the ticket we booked the night before was through Australia. And it didn't work out because they wouldn't let me through because I wasn't a New Zealand citizen, but we got rebooked on a flight directly from Dubai to New Zealand. And in the end, I was only able to enter the country and even board the plane because we had the foresight to bring our marriage certificate so we could prove we were married. It was just a really, really, really intense experience. And being pregnant on top of that, there were definitely several moments where I was like, I don't know what we're doing. And also I was meant to have my 20-week scan the following week. And I just briefly talked to my midwife in London about that, also telling her we were leaving sooner than we had expected. And she said that it would be fine if I had the scan a little bit later, but advised that I have it before, I guess, 24 weeks, because there's sort of a sweet spot with the size of the baby, where it's big enough and developed enough that you can see all the parts, but it's small enough that usually you can get all the parts in one scan. It's still moving around quite a lot. So at that point we felt confident that would be possible. We thought we would be in Singapore just a few weeks later. We got to New Zealand. We hunkered down in an Airbnb for 2 weeks. And then during those 2 weeks, we were told that we wouldn't be able to enter Singapore from New Zealand, and that we were going to be stuck in New Zealand for a while. And at the same time, New Zealand closed down, like the whole country. Everything closed down, even mail. So we couldn't get deliveries or you couldn't get takeaway food. They had restrictions on how many people could go grocery shopping from your bubble. And they call it bubbles. That's like the family unit that you quarantine with. And it was a really, really strict lockdown, one of the strictest, I think, in the world, that went on for about 7 weeks. So that also started as we had just arrived. So we went down and joined my husband's parents and his sister-in-law and her 7-year-old daughter in their bubble in the countryside in New Zealand, which was a total haven for our toddler. And I was then just kind of stranded with my pregnancy, not really knowing what I was going to do. I was originally a bit wary about engaging a midwife in New Zealand. I think I kept being hopeful that we would be able to go to Singapore, and just didn't really feel like getting more people involved with the pregnancy is necessary, or that it felt like a lot of energy kind of engaged, like having to tell people what we were doing there and why I would need care. But eventually at 24 weeks, I got myself together and called the local doctor who knew my husband's family and was lovely about us being there, and who got me in touch with the local midwives, who then got me signed up for a scan pretty much right away. I think it was just 2 days later. So I had a 20-week scan at 25 weeks. And at that point, the baby was too big to do it all in one go. So I ended up having to go back a few days later to get the other half of him. And we had not been 100% sure we were going to find out the gender this time. We did with my daughter. But at this end of the day, I decided that finding out the gender could kind of mean we could have like a tiny gender reveal party for my niece and my daughter, which was also something fun to do in the middle of lockdown without any kind of celebrations or anything happening. So I found out, and then we baked a little cake, and they were very excited about, was it going to be a girl? Was it going to be a boy? And we found out it was a boy. And I think for me as well, there was, we had like one bag of clothes each. We didn't know when we were going to be reunited with our things. We didn't know where we were going to have the baby. We didn't really know anything at that point. But yeah, luckily the scan was super healthy. I also had bloods done at that time, and my blood platelets came back low, but much higher than with my daughter. And I still didn't have any symptoms. So I felt sort of like very confident and relaxed about that part at that stage. And and then I just continued the pregnancy without a care provider for the next, I guess, that was at 25 weeks, so the next 6 weeks. And we came out of lockdown during that time in New Zealand and started talking about, okay, what are we actually going to do? What are the chances we'll be able to make it to Singapore before I'm so super pregnant that I'm basically due? And I think around 31 weeks, I basically sat my husband down and was like, we need to put a pin in this and just make a decision about whether we're staying. And if we're staying, we need to find a place where we can live for the next 3 months and have a baby, because we can't just like be traveling around and staying at my in-laws and my sister-in-law and little Airbnbs for a week and your aunt's summer house and whatever. We need to start getting a little bit ready. I think my nesting instinct kicked in. So we decided that we were going to stay in New Zealand and have the baby there. And we also decided then that we were going to go down to our kind of favorite part of New Zealand, which is the mountain region, the Southern Alps. There's a small ski resort town there called Queenstown, which is just like a beautiful place in the world, with these big alpine lakes and mountains, and it's also very rural. So there is actually a tiny hospital in the town, but it's mainly basically stabilizes people who've had injuries while like skydiving or skiing, and then they send them in a helicopter 20 minutes to a hospital in a town that's about a 3.5-hour drive away. Anyway, so we decided we were going to go down and stay there and just use this opportunity to spend time in a part of the world that we really loved. But I think we also just, after getting down there, had to reconsider for ourselves if that was still the right choice to then have a baby at home, because we had lived very openly in central London, and we're planning to move to Singapore. And that means that a hospital is only ever 10 minutes away, but moving something very rurally all of a sudden, if something happened in the birth, we would be much, much further away from a hospital that could, support further intervention. And at the end of the day, I think we felt like in most births, things happened slowly. And if there started being red flags around the birth, then we could be a little more conservative about when we wanted to meet. And if things go wrong in birth that require immediate attention, then they require immediate attention. And then it doesn't really matter if you're 10 minutes away or 3 hours away from a hospital. So we decided that as long as, everything continues as it had, we would still want to stay at home and enjoy the birth being uninterrupted in terms of not having to move space, and not putting ourselves in a place where, I don't know, we might be offered medicine at transition, which was what happened with my daughter. I was offered codeine during transition, and I took it, and I think it was not completely unnecessary, and I don't know, but in all the books and stuff, it says that morphine can create infants that are a little bit drowsy at birth, and that happened with my daughter because I'd literally just taken morphine just before having her, and I thought that was just really a silly thing to have offered me at that time, and also for me to take. But in that moment, going through transition, I wasn't really. We didn't really discuss the kind of pros and cons of it. I was just kind of predictably, as a woman in transition, many women in transition do, asking for relief. And given how far along I was, that felt like the right fit, I suppose. But it also takes like 30 to 60 minutes to kick in. And my pushing phase was less than 60 minutes. So it wouldn't have really, I don't think it would have really had any impact on how the birth felt in any case. But yeah, so we decided that we still, wanted to stay home where things like that wouldn't necessarily occur. So I went online and found a home birth forum for New Zealand, and I found a home birth midwife that operated in that area, and I reached out to her and I explained our situation, and she just wrote me back right away saying, if you're here and you're pregnant, we would love to offer you care, we and my team. And the system in New Zealand is I think really unique in that it's super midwifery driven and led, but you also get to choose your own provider, even though it's also public, it's free. So you go online and there are all these profiles, and you can interview with several different midwives, and then choose the midwife that's the right suit for you, assuming they have time and space for you in your birthing window. And then they're the ones that support you through your pregnancy and birth and postnatally. And they usually operate in a team, so they have a backup midwife if for some reason they're not available at the time of your birth. But I was at that point 32 weeks pregnant, and I actually hadn't, except for my 2 scans, I hadn't really had care in this pregnancy, which was, definitely not what I imagined. But actually I had felt okay about. When we were quarantined in New Zealand, I read the Janine Parvati Breaker book, Prenatal Yoga and Natural Childbirth. It's from the 70s, and most of the prenatal yoga, I think you wouldn't really consider prenatal appropriate anymore. But she also has her birth stories in there, and there's some really lovely quotes and sort of mantras. And there is one in particular, which I had read, which was, I discovered that I remained centered and carried my own home totally within myself. And I had sort of taken that on me and used that as a mantra whenever I felt a bit like, where are we in the world and what is happening and why don't I have a care provider or know where I'm giving birth? And it was, I am centered and carry my own home totally within myself. So I felt okay about, being not actually having a care provider, really. And I also did a lot of meditation and walking and yoga throughout the pregnancy. So I don't know, I came to a grounding in my circumstances. And yeah, I met with my midwife, and she was just everything I had ever imagined a midwife could be. She looked like a midwife. She spoke like a midwife. She just had this super calming influence. She seemed incredibly competent. She'd worked rurally for most of her career with home births. She delivered breached home births and multiple home births and all kinds of home births. So that's another thing in the UK. Midwives, not all midwives, but midwives that work under the NHS, they're fairly regulated. They can operate outside regulations, I suppose, but then you have to sign a lot of waivers. But in New Zealand, that's not the case. In New Zealand, they have guidelines, but they're there to service you, is how my midwife put it. So, she'd seen everything. So she was like, we can just be completely, we can just follow this birth and do what we feel is right. It's not like if you go to 42 weeks, then we're no longer, we have to get into a situation where we would consider you not appropriate for home birth if everything still seems fine, or if your waters break and there's some light meconium, we don't necessarily have to think about transferring, or there were just a lot of things like that where we had some really good conversations about what we wanted to do in terms of the home birth, and I felt really good about her answers and her perspective on birth. So yeah, we ended up having, I think, 1 or 2 more consultations than you would normally have between 32 and I guess 40 weeks, just to really get to know each other a little bit better and talk a little bit more about some of my concerns for my first birth and how we might manage that better this time around if similar things came up. And I think the biggest, one of the things we talked about was that with my daughter, I had irregular contractions, very irregular contractions, basically up until transition. So in my birth notes from that birth, it says my first stage of labor was 0 minutes, which obviously it wasn't 0 minutes. It was more like 3 days, but it was just very irregular.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we talked about this having an irregular labor pattern and what that might look like the second time around. And she basically said to me, if that could be the same this time around. So if your contractions even get to 10 minutes apart, you need to call me. We can't wait for you to get into a 311 because that might just not really happen for you. Because it didn't happen with my daughter. And just things like that. So we just, we talked about managing transition and, managing everything. And then, we got set up at our little rental apartment. We bought 7 new towels and 2 buckets. And we rented a birth tub from their midwifery team has a birth tub that they rent out. So we rented that. I was actually a water birth. I was one of the first water births in Denmark. I was part of the experiment of water birth. And my parents don't necessarily have the best. I mean, they have, my birth story is very funny, but they weren't like water was the game changer. They were more like water was a distraction. So I wasn't very called to have a water birth, but I thought it was like $40 to rent the birth tub, and I felt like that was good money given out if it was give us more options during the birth. So I thought it would be good to have it, even if we weren't necessarily going to use it. I didn't have any urge to get in water when I had my first birth. So I didn't really think I necessarily would with this one either. And we asked my sister-in-law, who we'd obviously stayed with for like 2.5 months during the pregnancy, if she would come and help with my daughter during the birth. She was at that point a 3-hour drive away. I want to say about her that she works on a farm, and at that time of year, they do lambing. It's a sheep farm, very cliche in New Zealand. So she's basically a sheep midwife for like 3 months of the year. So she was just delivering sheep all day, every day, or lamb all day, every day at that time of her life during those months anyways. So anyways, I was like, you should come and assist me with my birth. But she's just, she's not squeamy, I guess is how you can say it. And she's just very like, I guess I want to use the term grounded again. And I love her, and our daughter loves her. And I felt like she would be a really good person to bring in to the birth as well. And and then we just hunkered down, and I went to see a osteopath, I guess, a chiropractor, an osteopath, to just get like alignment, just like 2 or 3 weeks before birth. And she then said, "Oh, you should come back in 2 weeks when you're 39 weeks, so we can do this again, just, before the baby comes." And I got to 39 weeks, and I was just basically done with this pregnancy. I didn't want to be pregnant anymore. I didn't have this experience with my daughter. I was happy to be pregnant every day with my daughter, even though I went to 41 plus weeks. But at 39 weeks with my son, I was done. I was just emotionally like exhausted, and I just wanted him to get here. We only had like 3 or 4 weeks. We only had the flat for 3 or 4 weeks after he was going to be born, and then the plan still was to go to Singapore. And I wanted to try and optimize like the rest after birth. And I was like, every day you don't come is one day less we can rest before we have to travel again. And we can't. I just felt like really stuck in a way that was very uncomfortable, and I felt physically stuck because of the size of my belly. I couldn't move, when sleeping, and I'd been walking like 5 kilometers a day, but I just was like waddling at this point. It was pointless. And I didn't feel like I could be the kind of mom that I wanted to be for my daughter, because I was so unphysical. And I also just got really overwhelmed with my emotions that week of not having my family there. My mom never even having felt the baby kick because she was in Denmark, of not having been surrounded by any of my friends, and just really being sort of alone at the end of the world. And yeah, I was kind of a very, like, I'm a very positive person, but it was very kind of a dark week for me. I felt really sort of depressed for the first and only time of my life, just that week. And I kind of like almost cried myself to bed every night, sleep every night. And just, I was really, really unhappy, and really, really, really wanted the pregnancy to end and to give birth, and to be on the other side of the pregnancy, just feeling like everything would be better. Like there would be no coronavirus magically or something. And I could like travel and see my mom. I should note, I still haven't seen my mom. So that definitely didn't happen. But at the time it felt like that would happen. So I just felt really done that week. And every night I would have a few Braxton Hicks contractions. And I had this Ina May Gaskin quote in the back of my head: "Birth requires all of your attention." And I was like, these aren't requiring any of my attention. This is not birth at all. And I was just really done. And then I went to this osteopath appointment on the Thursday, and the osteopath was like, "Are you pregnant? Or are you in labor?" And I was like, "No, I'm not in labor." And she was like, I think you are." And I was like, "No, definitely not." And anyways, she was just like, "I think this baby is coming like today or tomorrow." And she kind of sent me home with that. And I was like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm only 40 weeks on Sunday. There's no way this baby is coming anytime soon. I'll be pregnant forever. It's never ending. And yeah, I went home. I went to bed that night still really angry and upset. My husband actually said, I hope this pregnancy will end soon because I'm not sure our marriage can last many more weeks of you being in this mood, which made me giggle. He was right. But anyways, we woke up on the Friday morning, and I was having a few very regular, very, very, very mild contractions, and my mucus plug had come out. So we called my midwife and told her that something might be going on. And then we sent my daughter we had sent her up for daycare a few hours a week. That was on the Friday. So we sent her to daycare. We went for a little bit of a walk. It had been like the most beautiful weather all week, but that week that day it was super rainy. So it wasn't a very long walk. And we came home, and I rested a little bit in the morning. The contractions were extremely irregular, like every 40 minutes, every hour. It went like maybe 2 every 25 minutes, and then 40 minutes again, whatever. So it was just a really, really relaxed day, just being inside. And I don't even really remember what we did. I think just lay in bed a lot and relaxed, meditated, and walked around a little bit, had some food. And then my daughter came back. My husband at 4, we decided at 1 to call my sister-in-law to just tell her to come down. We thought, okay, well, if anything, she can stay for the weekend, and then we just don't have to worry about her being 3 hours away in case something happens in the middle of the night. And at 4, my husband took my daughter to the playground, and I decided to go have another nap. And they came back at 5, and we started cooking dinner for my daughter. And my husband said, "Oh, we better just start timing the contractions just in case." They were still very spaced out. And then he said, "And I'm also, I think I'm going to put together the birth tub because then at least it's ready." So he started doing that. And as he was doing that, he basically got interrupted every 10 minutes because I had another contraction. So he kept not being really moving on with things because I kept having contractions. And he realized after this happened like 3 or 4 times, that probably I was in more kind of moving towards more established labor. So he called our midwife and said, that now things were about 10 minutes apart, and that, she should maybe thinking about coming by in the next, couple of hours and just checking in on us. And she was like, "Definitely, I'm in my car. I'll be right there." And I was still fine. I was like, this is okay. I had to move through the contractions, but they were, again, still very manageable, until about, I guess, 6:30, where I had one very powerful contraction that like brought me to my knees. And I was then on my hands and knees on our yoga mat in the living room right next to the dining room table. And I didn't move from that place. It was just the contractions just at that point just came one on top of the other. For the next hour, it was pretty intense, I guess is the right word for saying it. And I got, just as I had with my daughter during transition, I got myself into this place of like, everything is wrong. I'm only 4 centimeters. I can't do this for another 12 hours. We're going to have to go to hospital and get pain management drugs. I was convinced that my son was footling breech. I was like, in my head, I was just like, this is all not happening here. And our midwife still wasn't there. And I was like, and my husband was starting to get a bit, I guess, freaked out because he really wanted the midwife to come and support us for the actual birth, and not to deliver the baby himself. And I guess he had been with me at my last labor, so he was recognizing the patterns that the baby would maybe be here very soon. So he basically he was very sweet. He was sitting with my daughter and rubbing my back during contractions. And my daughter was amazing. She was just also like patting my shoulder and bringing me water, her little water bottle. She was very, very sweet. And anyways, the midwife arrived, and we had talked about beforehand that I didn't really want any cervical checks. I hadn't had any with my daughters because my water had broken before labor began, and they don't recommend checks when your waters have been broken for a while. So anyways, we talked about that. But she said she came in, and basically I was on my hands and knees, and there's apparently this mark on your lower back that can happen when you're fully dilated. And she said my t-shirt had written up, so she said she could just see that mark very, very clearly. So she basically just sat right next to me and said, you're doing super well, and if you feel like your body feels like pushing, then you can lean into that. You're fully dilated, and I was going through all her things. I was like, oh no, I'm only 6 centimeters. The baby's foot length breathed, or whatever. And she was like, I'm pretty sure it's not. I'm going to get the Doppler and just see where the heartbeat is and listen to him. And, depending on where that is, I think we can hear that he's head down. She did that and reassured me. And she was like, based on your presentation, you're definitely fully dilated. So, you can definitely don't have to worry about that. And just was, really, really, really sweet. I just, my body started pushing, and I don't know how to push a baby or a placenta out. I knew this from my daughter. I have to let my body do the work for me, and I guess, as they say, breathe the baby out. But that was what happened again this time. Just let my body do the work. The only thing I will say was that I'd been on hands and knees, and just as my baby was crowning, I got this really overwhelming feeling that I couldn't stay in that position, that I had to be more upright. And I said out loud, the baby isn't going to be born this way. And I think my wife and my midwife heard it as that I was having some kind of, just like was saying it. And they were like, no, you're fine. You can birth this way. And I was like, no, I need to be in a different position. And my husband got on his knees, and I got into this kind of position of embracing him in a half squat, which I think is really romantic. Then me and my husband breathed our baby out while embracing, and then he was here, and it was 8:30 p.m. and my husband hadn't even managed to finish dinner that he had started at 5, and it was just magic. And we were overjoyed. It just immediately, I just felt myself again, and I felt happy. And I wanted to bring the baby up to my chest, as you do, sort of instinctually, but he had a very, very short cord, so I could only bring him to like my belly button. And so we did, I guess, delayed cord clamping, but it wasn't very delayed, because I was like, I want to bring the baby up to my chest. So I very quickly was like, I think this cord is done pulsing, and I got the scissors and I cut the cord myself, which I thought was really cool. And then the baby started nursing, and right away, and my daughter had done as well. She was a phenomenal nurser. He's not as good a nurser. I guess we should talk about the placenta. The placenta actually I didn't have any excessive bleeding or anything, and I could feel the placenta like being inside my body, but I just didn't get that last contraction. And I was on the floor of this temporary apartment that was wall to wall carpeted, and I, after about an hour of lying there, I had gotten up and gone to the bathroom in the meantime, but I asked our midwife if she could give me Pitocin so my body would have that last contraction to deliver the placenta. I tried to push it out, but I really don't know how to push, is basically what I've learned about myself through 2 births. She talked about, we could wait longer, and that I hadn't had excessive bleeding or anything. But I just really wanted the birth to be done, and it was a very uncomfortable feeling, heaviness of the placenta inside of me, detached or whatever. And I wanted to have a shower and call my parents and have food. And I know you can, I guess, do all those things with the placenta inside of you, but I kind of wanted to wrap it up. So she accommodated me, and the placenta then came out right away, and it was in perfect condition. And I was super happy that I had made that request. And yeah, had a shower. We got snuggled up on the couch. We had some food. We called my mom. My sister-in-law was there, and she came back up from having snuggled my daughter to bed. And yeah, it was just like, then we just sat and had some champagne and some food, and it was really magic. And then I spent the next 2 weeks in bed, and my husband was amazing and took care of me and our daughter and our moving plans. And then after 3 weeks, we packed up our 3 bags and went back to my in-laws for like a week. And then we left for Singapore with a 4.5-week-old baby and a toddler in tow, finally. And we got here, and it was, not exactly the most dreamy postpartum, because we didn't have any support here and we knew very few people. But yeah, we were also welcomed, I think, by some really nice people through like various Facebook groups and stuff like that. We met some other moms that have been really amazing, particularly one English woman who's been just so supportive of me and my family, even though she'd never known us before, and been so helpful to us. And then finally, on my birthday, all our stuff arrived from London. It was the end of October, and we got settled into a new flat, and got into a new routine. And my son is now 5 months old and just like the happiest little dude. And it just has been such a crazy but really magical ride at the same time.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so that's how we had I guess like a home birth in a temporary flat.
Yeah. You guys had been all over. I can only imagine like getting mail probably just doesn't happen right now. So many different addresses.
No, we still get mail from, like some mail is arriving at my parents, some mail is arriving at my in-laws, some mail is arriving here, some mail is arriving at our flat in London that we own, but it's rented out. We know the renters, and they're really nice about forwarding it to us, but it's starting to get consolidated. Let's put it that way.
Good. Well, I'm glad you were able to find some community support. That's like one of those things Facebook is really great for, is those mom groups and whatnot. So, what other resources did you want to share here at the end?
I am like an avid reader, and I've read so many books about birth. And I know some like Ina May Gaskin is shared here all the time, but I wanted to share some that I don't know if I shared very often, or maybe I just haven't heard them, that I found to be like really, really helpful. So one is Sheila Kitzinger. I think she's a British midwife. She's written tons of books, but she's written one that's called Birth and Sex, which is about ecstatic birthing, or I guess it's also called orgasmic births, which I've actually with my daughter, I had a fully ecstatic experience for 2 or 3 hours, which was amazing. And I wouldn't say I had that with my son. It was too short, I think, for that. But I was very present and beautiful, as you've just heard. So I think she just writes really, really well about birth. And then Birth: A History by Tina Cassidy, which is just really good at framing birth and framing how all women give birth in the culture that they're in. And so do we now. And just has a lot of interesting information about the history of birth. If you are interested in birth, it's interesting. It's very interesting. Then there's Everything Below the Waist by Jennifer Block. She's also the one who's written, I think, Pushed, which is, I think, maybe more famous about birth. But this one it's not just about birth. It's also about fertility and about menopause and just everything below the waist. The title says, period. It's really good. She's a really good writer, so the book kind of reads itself. Then Aviva Jill Rom, her Natural Healing After Birth about the 4th trimester. I think it's an old book. It's from 2002, but it has a lot of good information about like setting boundaries, and it has some fun like recipes in there as well, like some witchy brews and ways to use like aromatherapy and stuff. But I think for me, her stuff, I read it when my first pregnancy, and the stuff about, setting boundaries and like kind of what to expect and taking rest and stuff like that she writes really well about. She had 4 kids, so she's also quite good at writing about not just, what you do when you're a first-time mom, but also how to think about certain things to maybe think about if you have other children, and how community support is maybe even more important when you have other children, because it's very hard to look after other children when you have a newborn, especially just in those very first weeks when your body is still doing a lot of healing. And then 10 Moons by Jane Hardwick Collins. So really, I used that in this pregnancy and birth, and it has really cool kind of prompts around like journaling or things to talk about with your partner, and but not like things to talk about with your partner. It's like one of them is like, what music are you listening to at the moment, and how is that maybe informing how you're thinking about this birth? Or and it also has information about birth and pregnancy. And then there's a really, really cool Danish book, but they also do the book in English, and I think you can Google it, but I think it's only sold on a Danish book website. But it's a book for children, specifically. In English, it's called When Sean Was Born. In Danish, it's called Da Knud Kom Ud. And it's written by a Danish guy called Jesper Manneke and a midwife called Susanne Warming. But it has like really neat pictures. And my daughter, she was only just 2.5 when my son was born, but she wanted to read that book every night. She just thought it was like really cool pictures, and you can see there's like a picture of the baby inside the belly, and a picture of it's about home birth, but there's a picture of the mom in a tub, like pushing out the baby, and of the newborn baby nursing. And so I think it really, really helped her prepare her for birth. The text is probably focused on slightly older children, but the pictures prompted really good, like just jump off points to talk to her a little bit about birth and what she might have to expect. She wasn't there for I didn't forget to say that, but she wasn't there for the very last pushing part, because her bedtime is like 7:30, and she was tired, and we took her off to bed. But and James was born at 8:30, but she was there for the whole day, so it was helpful. And then I think there's a couple of podcasts. There's a podcast which is quite new called The Radical Womb, which is done by 2 doulas in like the Bay Area, which has they have some like cool conversations about birth and pregnancy and postpartum and raising children. And then there's a Danish podcast called To the Moon Honey, which is in Danish, but it has really nice birth stories and also like postnatal conversations, stuff like that. Then we did a course with my first child pregnancy called Active Birth, which is done at a yoga studio called Try Yoga in London, which is really, really good about just both really good birth information, but very good in terms of prepping you for having an active, unmedicated birth, if that's what you're interested in having, with just like positions to consider and how to give counter pressure and stuff like that. It's run also by 2 doulas there. And then here in Singapore, there's the one midwife called Red Miller, who runs a company, I guess, or an organization called Love Based Birth, which also does, I think, they do like birth classes, and they also offer home birth services if you're in Singapore and interested in that. So I didn't get to take her course because I never made it to Singapore, obviously, but I spoke with her on the phone several times, and she also has a book that I've read, obviously, and just lots of resources online and stuff. And she's just super helpful if you have any questions about giving birth in Singapore. She's really good at both answering them or providing you resources in terms of doulas or other people who can answer them. So that's sort of some of the resources. Obviously, some of them not for maybe appropriate for American listeners, but maybe appropriate for people elsewhere.
Yeah, thank you for that list. You weren't kidding. That's quite a list of books. We'll link to all of them on the show notes page in case anybody's driving or whatever and can't write them down. But what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. My handle is Allied Since 84. ALLIEDSINCE 84. And it's a public account, but I'm not like an influencer at all. It's just really my friends and family that I'm connected to there. But anyone can follow me and certainly reach out to me if they have questions about moving countries or choosing to home birth, even if that's not something that's necessarily common in your circles, or giving birth in the UK or New Zealand or Singapore. Or Denmark. I've got those 4 countries kind of covered.
You do, yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories today. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Bren. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, now I'm going to talk with Anissa from Expectful, today's sponsor, and we're going to hear all about their birth prep library and hypnobirthing course. And don't forget, you can go to expectful.com/birthhour for an extended free trial of 14 days. Hi, Anissa. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
All right, so we got to hear from you last month a little bit about how you discovered Expectful and a little bit of your story, but can you remind listeners who you are and what you do over at Expectful for anyone who's new to the podcast?
Absolutely. Again, so my name is Anissa Amat. I am the head of community at Expectful, which is a meditation and sleep app for fertility, pregnancy, and parenthood. It's so just a full circle, I guess you can call it. I discovered Expectful, in 2018 when I was pregnant with my now 19-month-old daughter, Nyla. And it was a couple of weeks after my 20-week scan when I discovered the app. My doctor had expressed concerns about my baby's weight, which led to weekly visits with a high-risk specialist. And I was holding on to this idea that everything in my pregnancy, every step was supposed to be perfect. And while there wasn't anything that I was necessarily doing wrong, I still placed so much blame on myself when I was going through, they were telling me like my placenta wasn't delivering enough nutrients to my baby. And I believed that was my fault. Yeah. Right. So I was introduced to Expectful, and the very first meditation, I remember it like it was yesterday. The first meditation that I did was trusting your body. And I remember just meditating and like listening to the words and like sobbing. But I mean, the meditation, it supported me and it encouraged me and reminded me that my body knew what it was doing and to trust it. So now, a couple of years later, I have the opportunity to now write these meditations for women all over the world, and to, just try to give them what I received when I discovered Expectful.
I love that story. That just like gives me goosebumps when I hear it. So neat. All right, so last time we chatted a little bit about just kind of an overview of everything you guys offer with Expectful, and today we're going to do a deeper dive into your a little bit newer birth prep library and very new hypnobirthing course. So this is a topic that comes up a lot when I'm talking to my listeners that are looking for different techniques or guides and methods on preparing for birth. So what are some of the benefits of a meditation practice when preparing for birth?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the greatest benefits that meditation provided me when I was in labor was deep breathing techniques. Mm-hmm. By gaining this skill, I was able to relax and focus my concentration on my breathing. And I mean, obviously, I was still in so much pain, but I was able to really direct my attention off of the pain and to my breathing. Meditation can also be helpful in reducing some of the fear of the unknown that we step into before and sometimes even during labor.
Yes. I think that the unknown of labor is definitely the common theme in all the stories that I hear. And I think that any extra tools you can have in your toolbox to cope with labor are amazing. So it sounds like it really is possible to meditate during labor. So can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So like I said, it's all in the deep breathing and guiding your awareness to your breath. It's all about acknowledging the pain and that it's there and that it's with you and occurring within you, but just kind of allowing it to just be, not giving it your attention or your focus. It can definitely be challenging to refocus your awareness to your breath while in labor, especially when those contractions are like really back to back. You know what I mean? But we also, some of our offerings include guided meditations that guide you in reclaiming your focus and that support you through your breathing. And we love hearing stories and getting pictures from our community of people using Expectful during their birth. That's
so cool. Okay, so just continuing this conversation around different techniques you can use during labor. I know that Expectful recently recently added a hypnobirthing course to the app that's just completely included with the app subscription, which is so amazing. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that course and why you've expanded beyond just meditation and more into an actual course format?
Absolutely, yeah. So we took a poll from all of our users and asked what they wanted to see in the app. Overwhelmingly, women wanted to know about hypnobirthing. And we're really excited that the course is available in-app at no extra cost. So if someone is interested in exploring it, they can start on a free trial and get access to the course and everything else available in the app. So the course is divided into a few main chapters and bite-sized lessons, so you can fit it easily into your schedule. We worked with a clinical hypnotherapist and hypnobirthing teacher to create it, and it covers why hypnobirthing matters and how it works. It provides skills necessary to use this technique. And most importantly, the course guides you on how to plan and manifest your own positive birth experience.
So cool. I love that this is in the app now because people are always asking me which hypnobirthing course to do in person versus online and all these things. And I personally have never done hypnobirthing, so I rely on other people's recommendations, but I've been able to check out y'all's course and it's really well done and it's so accessible being just included in the app. So I love that. So other than meditation, were there any other techniques or forms of support that you personally used during your birth that you think would be helpful to share?
So like I said, deep breathing was extremely helpful for me during my labor, which was a technique that I learned from meditating. And oh my gosh, I also had a doula, and she supported me throughout my pregnancy and during my labor and delivery. And God, doulas are truly unsung heroes. I mean, she was an herbalist. So throughout my pregnancy, she was giving me a different tea every trimester to support my body with whatever it was going through during that trimester. And she also helped me with my breathing during labor. We did some different exercises before I went into labor so that I was prepared. But during labor, she supported me in finding positions and techniques that alleviated any pain that I was experiencing. My husband, mom, and sisters were present, and she also showed them different ways to support me during labor. And my birth did result in a cesarean birth after 20 hours of labor and 4 hours of pushing. But still, I have no idea what I would have done without her.
Yeah, we're huge proponents of doulas around here as well. I love that you shared about, having done all this preparation and surrounded yourself with support. And then you did end up having a cesarean birth. And I know that, from so many of the stories that I've heard, it can be really hard to process an unplanned cesarean birth, and it can feel really defeating and confusing. And I think, it's getting better. There's not as much of a stigma around it as maybe there was even a few years ago. I think it's so much of that is just people sharing their stories online, which I love. And I also really love that Expectful has they've thought of everything. You guys have thought of everything. Specific resources for those of us who have had cesarean births. So could you share a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So we have a pack of meditations for cesarean birth and cesarean recovery. And these meditations are so special to me due to my experience with a cesarean birth. When I was writing them, I was thinking about my experience and what the support that I needed when I was going through the birth and the recovery. So with these meditations, the message that I'm hoping mamas gain is that a belly birth is birth, and to extend patience to yourself during your recovery period, and to honor the magic that is your body, this body that served as a home for your baby throughout your pregnancy. And something else that I really dealt with was that I had failed at something failed, or that, oh my God, my birth plan failed. Yeah. And just reminding mamas, like I said, to just extend grace to yourself. You know what I mean? When you're kind of going through that thinking.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think that a lot of the things out there to prepare for birth, just kind of, even though we know that 30% of births will be cesarean births, at least 30%, in some states more, and in some populations more, but so many of the things we see are exclusive of those experiences. So I love that you guys are addressing that, and we do the same with our childbirth course. We actually have specific affirmations for cesarean birth because so many of the affirmations are so specific to vaginal births, but you still are birthing your baby, and you want to be in that right mindset for that, both during and after.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I feel like we could talk forever about this, but I want people to be able to know where they can just go ahead and get started and learn more about Expectful.
Yeah, so to try out the app, they can start a free trial at expectful.com or by simply downloading Expectful in the App Store.
All right, perfect. And we'll link to that from the show notes page and everything so people can find it easily. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much again to Charlotte for sharing her birth story with us, and to Anissa for chatting with me about Expectful. Don't forget, you can go to expectful.com/birthhour to get that extended 14-day free trial. And if you want more information from today's episode, just head over to thebirthhour.com and search for Charlotte's name in the search bar, and her show notes will come right up, and she has some great resources listed for you there as well.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.